remembering the testimony at the Credentials Committee, a testimony of faith, freedom, and first-class citizenship. In 1964, the Fannie Lou Hamer testified before the Democratic Party's Credentials Committee about the suffering of African Americans and those willing to help fight for a true democracy in America. Now, as a founding member of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, Ms. Hamer was a spokeswoman for the movement and paid a heavy price for her activism. 50 years later, there continues to be unfair discriminatory practices and ill-warranted treatment of African Americans, particularly young black men. Now, in honor of Ms. Hamer, this symposium seeks to uncover the oftentimes overlooked plight of urban youth in their relationship to law enforcement and the criminal justice system, and bring forth solutions to the growing rates of imprisonment and violence in our communities. And this particular session on this morning, we're going to be talking about the criminalization of urban youth in America, why Ferguson and why now. And so to kick off this event, I think we have some pretty great panelists, but we are going to welcome Dr. Lolita Gray to come up and guide this discussion with us. She's one of our newest members in the political science department in the College of Liberal Arts. So if you would help me to welcome Dr. Lolita Gray. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. Good morning. I'm certainly happy to see everyone that has come out today with us to celebrate this great occasion. It is my duty and my honor to present to you the panelists. We do have several esteemed gentlemen here that's going to be speaking to us on this topic. And let me go ahead and give you an introduction to them. Of them, the first will introduce is Dr. David Rimmer. Dr. Rimmer is an assistant professor in the Department of Criminal Justice and Sociology and College of Liberal Arts. He's also a correctional officer at Texas Department of Criminal Justice. He received his bachelor's in social work at Mid-Tennessee University. He received a master's of art in criminal justice administration at Tennessee State University. He has also earned a doctorate in criminal justice administration from Sam Houston University. Now, his foci lies in various different areas of criminal justice. He's recently published work, you can find it in Prison Journal and Youth Violence and Juvenile Justice. Dr. Rimmer. Now, I'm going to try and read off as many of these salient qualifications, although they do have many. I kind of like picked them out here because we only have an hour and a half for the session. So the next we have Attorney William H. Hanson. Attorney Hanson, he is the department chair of Administration of Justice, the co-director of Law and Democracy Program, and I'm hoping I'm pronouncing this right. Is that Chabot?
Perfect.
Okay, Chabot College. Okay, the Bachelor's of Political Economy at UC Berkeley, that's in California. He earned a JD at Columbia University School of Law. He is a practicing attorney in California as well as Colorado, and he has held various positions in academia, which include Dean of Community Partnership and Workforce Development at Laney College. He has held several memberships. One is in the California State Bar on Counsel in Excess and Fairness. Attorney William J. Hanson. And the third individual I will be introducing is Mr. Kevin Levine. I'm trying to give everybody doctors here. He is the Hinds County Deputy Commander. He is an instructor in the Department of Criminal Justice and Sociology at Jackson State University. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Criminal Justice and Correctional Services at Jackson State University, a Master's in Criminology and Justice Administration, also from JSU. He has been nominated twice for Metro Top Cop while employed at Jackson Police Department. He was selected on several occasions as the Officer of the Month as well as the Officer of the Year. He served as Deputy Commander for the Hinds County Sheriff Department Reserve Unit, President of Desert Storm, and he also a member of the ACLU. That will be Mr. Kevin Blunt. I hope I have introduced them, and certainly they will give you all everything else that they would like you all to know, and I want to give them an opportunity to move forward with this part of the symposium, and I turn it over to them. We'll start, Dr. Rimmer, you can go ahead and start, we'll go in that order. We'll go in order of the program, Dr. Rimmer, and then we'll go with Mr. Hanson, and then Mr. Lane. And of course, all of you will have questions. So, Mr. Rimmer, you will just go ahead and start.
Okay, when we talk about criminalization,
Use that mic.
When we talk about criminalization of any undesirable behavior that we may see in individuals, we're basically talking about how do individuals form laws. I mean, most of the time, you know, like we talk about stealing versus embezzlement. I usually tell my students the difference between blue-collar crimes versus white-collar crimes. To me, theft is theft. So when you're dealing with people of lower class, some people argue race, you know, blacks in particular. White people have a tendency to define crimes that are more harsh compared to white-collar crimes, such as embezzlement. Like, let's say if I work for Regions Bank and I steal $100, I'll probably just get a misdemeanor if somebody comes in there and use armed robbery, or not even use armed robbery, just stick their hand in their shirt like that. They're probably going to get 5 to 7 years for particularly committing that crime. So usually what I'm getting at is what we call procedural justice in the system. It's not just necessarily what we call criminalization. It's just when you define a crime, you question, is it fair? And usually the fairness comes in if you're black, if you live in poverty, versus somebody who comes, basically somebody who's white and live in a white affluent neighborhood.
Can I add to what he was saying on that?
Yes, please do.
When we talk about policy making and laws, when we teach in criminology, one of the first things we teach is that individuals who define and make the laws, which is in the legislative process, they define the laws as not to criminalize themselves. Okay? They write the laws as not to give you an example. While legislatures are in session, police officers, we can't write them a ticket. They're speeding, you can't write them a ticket. Why is that? They wrote the law. They wrote the law. There are loopholes that exist in the law because of that. Not only for them, but for their families. Let's talk on a national level. We give diplomatic immunity to what? Foreign dignitaries. Why? But the acts are criminal, but at the same time, it's not written for them. It's written for us. And it's one of the reasons why I get upset about students who sleep on criminology and criminal justice. We have fought a long time for the legislatures to put criminal justice in the middle schools, in our middle schools, because our kids are getting educated on what's criminal on the streets, and it's very misleading. But the legislators don't want, in my opinion, they don't want it in the middle school because they want you miseducated. So I guess what he's saying, miseducation of our young black youth is helping to project this negative image of what we do is criminal, what they do is criminal, because we're taught different ways. So I just want to add on that.
Well, that's good. I think you made a good point. And I would ask, and keeping in line with our topic here, the criminalization of urban youth in America, white persons and white males, if you all would discuss, based on what you said, that laws are not so much made for the persons that actually create or implement the laws.
Right.
So then what will be your discussion that you may have on whether or not, and I don't want to put you on the spot here,
I'm like an attorney.
on whether or not you think the actions of the police that actually shot the teenager in Ferguson, is that law protecting him more so than it protecting the victim?
I'm gonna let this gentleman here who use the law I have my view, but mine would be based on police.
I think that's a fair statement. I think we have a great balance on the panel. Good morning. I'm a civil rights lawyer running a criminal justice program, in other words. And so I think that's an important to note, because I think there's a political and social context we have to bring to law enforcement. I honor the work that law enforcement officers do, because we can't have a democracy if we don't have peace and stability. But when we talk about the criminalization of urban youth, that's a term. When we say urban, we know what we mean, right? We're really talking about black and brown youth when we start talking about urban areas. And when we look at the data, if this room was a group of black men, 1 in 3 of you all would be in the criminal justice system at some point in time in your life. And so that has consequences far beyond the individual. It impacts all communities. It impacts their life chances and opportunities as well. But I think that when we talk about that, I think Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow, really sort of raises what's important about this, that throughout our history, in other words, our Constitution wasn't necessarily made for us. It's through the great work of people like Brandon Duhamer and Dr. King and others that sort of brought these rights to bear. But we still have a situation where statistics show us that the people who are most likely to be targeted by police are in certain communities, and most of those communities are black and brown. And to answer your question about, I think you asked whether or not the laws protect both the officer or the individuals.
Well, more so the officer than the individual.
Well, I don't think we know yet. We're really waiting for this long-term grand jury to tell us what happened. But due process means that unreasonable search and seizure happens when you kill somebody. That's a violation of the Fourth Amendment right, when you arrest someone and you shoot someone unnecessarily. So I think there are some constitutional rights in play, but we're waiting for the facts. If we look at the South Carolina situation, I'm sure you all probably saw the stop that happened in South Carolina a couple of weeks ago, where the person was actually his driver's license for a seatbelt violation. Fortunately, we were able to have that on film, and so it became pretty clear about what that was in terms of the violation. But I think it's important, in other words, when we talk about this context, why first and why now, to really bring the racial dynamic into it, because I think that's an important part of American history. Not to harp on it, in other words, but that's the real deal about who we are as a country. Race has always been a significant and important part of who we are. Yeah.
So at this point, we will invite, does anyone in the audience have any questions for the gentleman at this point? The gentleman in the back.
My name is Carl Neal. I'm from Cleveland, Ohio. I just got one question for the panel. And for the students. Did everybody see that beat down of that black woman out in California? Did you see the way that cop beat that? I'm appalled as a black man to see a man, any color, beat a woman like that. So, young people, November 4th, go vote. Please, get out and vote. Well, yeah, they got to register first. But please, get out and vote. I'm from Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and I was in 1964 when we had a ride over there. My grandmother shipped me to Ohio because she didn't want me to go to jail. And I went to Ohio, and believe it or not, there's a lot more prejudice up there than it is down here today. So please go vote. Thank you.
I want to go back to your question about why first and why now. So timely, one of my students asked a question about, do I feel the militarization, Ferguson, and an example of militarization of our police force. And I told him, well, it is, but thank God we have the president we have, because he's called for a hearing and an investigation into the militarization of our law enforcement, which means they're getting the military-grade weapons and using them on our citizens. We all know Pastor Kamatalas would not, allow the military to work and use against our civilians, but the police department now are getting those military-grade weapons. And what the president question was, who's training them? What kind of training are they getting? And I think our panelists said it's like they got a, what'd you say, they got a Maserati, and they wanted to try it out. You get a new Maserati, you want to put it on the street and see how fast it goes. And I told them Ferguson is not the only one. You can go to Pearl, Mississippi and find, military-grade weapons. You go to Madison, Mississippi, and find military-grade weapons in the hands of our police department. Now, as our other panelists said, I'm gonna speak on the law enforcement because I've been a military police and I've been a civilian police officer. So I know both sides of it. And I know when I went to JPD, I graduated class president because I was like, wow, this is a breeze compared to what I went through as training in military police. Not to downgrade the civilian police training, but just to show you the paradigm, the difference in the quality of training that we have. And that's a legitimate question that the president had. Now, now we have a question about the police. Now, the question we have to ask about the citizen. How many of y'all know there's a split in the black community in First? There is a group of people that say they know what really happened, but they're scared to say something because those that are protesting would then what? Turn on them. So what do we do? What do we do? Sometimes we can help criminalize ourselves. And I tell my students all the time, before you pick up a sign and you run out there and start championing the cause of somebody else, make sure you do your own research to understand what's really going on. Don't get out there and then come back and say, oh, well, I didn't know. Do your own research and find out what's really going on, and then argue from the right point of view. Argue from an empirical standpoint, not from an anecdotal or I feel or this how I see it. The law is black and white, and I tell my students, everybody know what that means? That means color. It means what's written down is what's going to be argued when you get in that form called our court system. And lawyers, as our panelists, they don't argue from an anecdotal standpoint. He's looking for something that's been a precedent, that he can use a law to substantiate and to defend you. But if you go out there and say, well, I ride it just because I felt, okay, we all have, I feel it was wrong. But I want to do my research before I get out there. Because I know the criminal justice system is just waiting on me as a black man to get out there and show out on the side of the road. And anything that that officer has done to you prior to, the courts are pretty much going to kind of avoid that. I'm just going to be honest with you. I'm going to be honest with you. If you feel it's an unjust stop, then the proper form to argue that it's not there on the side of the road. Bring out your cell phone, record his action. And I know it takes a lot of restraint, but you want to know my restraint? Look on the walls in here. It took a lot of strength to sit at that Woodward counter and somebody pull something on you. But young kids today are so ready to act now, and that's what they're waiting on you to do. I'm telling you, I was on that, I'm not going to make it long about it. I've been in law enforcement for 26 years, but I told this gentleman why I got law enforcement. Because as a second grader right here at Gilbert Elementary, when they did forced integration, we couldn't go outside at the same time with the white kids. We went out once and the white kids went out a second time. I went out to recess and I forgot my coat. And we had a little red-haired, freckle-faced white kid left in the classroom. I went back in and he jumped up. What you doing in here, nigga? And you know me, I was like you. What? I'm from Washington, D.C. We're going to handle this. And we got into it. And the principal took me to the office. He said, you know what? I got to paddle you. He said, I can't whoop the white kid. I said, well, can you just tell me you paddle me? He said, no, because if you tell your friends and the white teacher find out, I'm going to get fired. It has been stacked against us since that day. So I became a police officer so I can defend your rights.
So let me go ahead, because I think there was some more questions from the audience. Dr. Hill?
I want the panelists to address the first part of this topic here. And that is, why are black youth being criminalized? It seems to me that is the central question here. And so can the panel address that question?
I'll take a shot at it. I think the gentleman's question from Cleveland is an important one about voting. And since we're talking here at the Fannie Lou Hamer Institute, Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow, sort of raises the theory that the same thing that Jim Crow used to do, the criminal justice system does just as well or better. In Mississippi, you probably got one of the highest felony disenfranchisement rates, in other words, in the country. You're not alone, in other words, which means that probably more than 50,000 people in Mississippi can't vote because they have felony convictions. You have felony disenfranchisement for being in jail, being on probation, being on parole, and you have some crimes that permanently disenfranchise you from voting. So when you go out on November 4th, there will be a lot of people who won't be able to go. And that disenfranchisement starts probably in school. Once you kick a kid out of school, you suspend a kid, the data shows that they're probably going to end up in the criminal juvenile justice system. If they're in the juvenile justice system, they're going to end up in the criminal justice system. And the recidivism rate for young people, that 18 to 24 rate, is really high. Once they go in for their first time, it's like what they say, a roach motel. They check in, but they don't check out. So what happens is that the criminal justice system operates the way Jim Crow used to operate. That you don't have access to public housing, you don't have access to financial aid, you don't have access to a wide range of things that really support your life chances and opportunities. In other words, so I'm not trying to suggest a conspiracy theory, but the data is just there. In other words, when you start talking about young black men, in other words, the criminal justice system can sort of rock you in a different way. As a military person, I was 11 Bravo R6, in other words, they asked me to be a legal clerk when I got into the Army. But my first experience with the criminal justice system was as a defendant in my own court-martial in the United States Army. Had I been convicted, there are several states that would have never let me practice law. And so when you start talking about why, I think that, in other words, that's part of it, in other words, because the criminal justice system is race neutral. And so you can't sort of holler about equal protection, in other words, if people are committing crimes, because most of us, even in our own communities, don't really lobby about black men in jail. They don't lobby about the consequences of the criminal justice system because those people, not us, are doing things that are bad. So I think that the criminal justice system, in other words, serves to accomplish what Jim Crow used to accomplish. In other words, in the context of disenfranchising a whole group of people, and particularly young black men, who I believe that in a society that's been sort of patriarchal, in other words, probably represents a threat to power of those who already hold it.
Had a question from the gentleman here? No.
How do you feel about the new gun policies and how they affect our society? They are to the point where policemen have to shoot to kill now citizens because they're allowed to carry open weapons. This seems like a trend now that police officers are, shooting, not using taser, using guns, and killing people. But you can't blame them because people are able to carry weapons, and I can see how this would feel in danger. Whose side would you be on in that situation?
I'm always on the side of criminal justice, law enforcement, and correction.
Me, I'm on the side of the Constitution. And the Constitution gives you a right to keep and bear arms. And I'm not saying I advise those policies, but if you have an open carry state, we do have some states that have open carry laws, citizens should have the right to really carry weapons. Police officers, in other words, shouldn't be able to shoot you because you're engaging in a lawful activity. I think that's really what the question becomes. The real issue becomes is that when does an officer have the right to use deadly force? And the Supreme Court has spoken to that. The Supreme Court says you can use deadly force when you are in danger or when you're protecting the public. In other words, someone actually walking around carrying a weapon that's holstered. How many go hunting here? How many got weapons in the back of your van? I mean, I grew up in Arkansas. There was always a gun in the corner, guns are placed. I would hate to get shot because I'm going deer hunting because I happen to have a weapon. So it really is about the training of police officers being able to use that discretion that they have. And oftentimes the data tells us again, in other words, that police are more likely to shoot a black man with a phone than they are a white man with a gun.
Let me chime on that. When he says training on that, you are trained in law enforcement. I'm a certified law enforcement officer, federal and state level. We train on what we call the use of force continuum. And we also train on what's called a FACS machine. It's a simulated shoot, don't shoot scenario. And you are trained to shoot as a last resort, even in the face of a weapon, because you are always supposed to give the perpetrator the opportunity, people don't believe this, to change their mind. But if you got in your mindset that you want to kill a person because you got the authority, you can train them as much as you want. But they're gonna shoot that person. And to stand your ground and the open carry laws are, to me, being used by the criminal justice system selectively. Because to me, Trayvon Martin was standing his ground. When he felt threatened by a perpetrator, he stopped and confronted that individual. And then all of a sudden, in the eye of the law, oh no, he became aggressive. No, but by the facts of standing ground, it says you can stand your ground and protect yourself. And he protected himself. Open carry, I was deputy commander at the sheriff department last year, when we first year came to play at the fair, that was a big topic. What do we do? Now we can't stop people from walking around at Jackson Fair with weapons. That was a hot button. I told my dad I was in charge of 90 deputies. You do not engage that person and question them about their weapon at all. Because we knew some people were going to try that law. But it goes back to the leadership. And that's who you hold accountable. You hold the leadership accountable. If one of my deputies would have shot, I would have been sued, and I would have been there on the part of that lawsuit. I wasn't going to have it. And yes, we did have people down there with a weapon, and they called in, I got a guy with a weapon. So what? The law allows him to protect himself. But it starts with the administration. And for the question he was asking about the criminalization of the young black male, it goes back, I always say, we need criminal justice in the middle class schools to start teaching our young black men and women, because you all are the fastest growing juvenile offenders, I'm gonna tell you that right now. And we're forgetting, we're sleeping on our young black men. So we have to go back and stop this miseducation of the black youth at those levels, sir. That's what the Jersey was.
So, okay, we have a question in the back, young lady in the back.
Yes, I didn't hear the first person speak, excuse me. But I hear a lot of fear in what you're saying, which I no doubt. You are African-American males, and you've experienced a lot of things that you can't talk about. Many of us have experienced a lot of things that we can't talk about because we're suffering from post-traumatic slave syndrome. Deny it if you wish, but it is there. Under no circumstances do we need to dignify these horrible laws that are made specifically to protect white men. They know this, we suspect this, and some of us won't admit it. It's absurd, as Alexander said in her book, Jim Crow. As Michelle Alexander said, she thought it was absurd that we would say that white people were doing to us what they were doing to us. That's because she had bought into the system, and that's one of the problems that the journalist Bob Herbert talks about, how the black people of the 60s, the 50s and the 60s, they were on the ball at one point, and then they sold out along the way. They became a part of the system, and this journalist is a white journalist. His latest book is Losing Our Way. So I would encourage you, professors especially, to read it. But I don't hold it against you at all for warning the young people what they should look out for. They should also understand where they are and who these laws were made for. These laws were created around normal, healthy development of African American children. But these laws were made specifically to entrap African American children, to turn them into criminals, and we need to recognize that. It's not that you need to change your behavior to such, but just absolutely know what's happening. But it interferes with normal development, because you get frustrated that for some reason doesn't feel right. It's because you are a black person. Yes, these laws are made to entrap you and to hold you down and cause you not to function, cause you not to think, cause you not to be creative. But these are, and Dr. Moore, in addition to Bob Herbert, her book cost too much for me, but I did the other one, Reconstructing Racism. Her book, that is the title of her book, but there are two, Reconstructing Racism. Both of them are great. It talks about the law schools and about the laws that are written and who they are written for. The book is $80, so it's sort of a research. Maybe you guys can read it. Law enforcement and, did you say an attorney?
Yeah, I do criminal justice as well.
Yeah, that's exactly what these books are about, the laws and how they are against the community. And Bob said that he placed the burden of coming out of this mess that we're in on those who were who brought us out of the 50s and the 60s, and that's the minority community.
Okay, we have another question from the audience, and I think that was a very interesting point that the young lady made. It does bear discussion. We actually feel like those laws are skewed so that they would keep young black men in a position where they're constantly being imposed upon in jail. Presently, we do know that even though blacks represent in the overall U.S. population 13%, but then we're representing 80% of the incarcerated population. Are we saying that our young black youth have a proclivity to commit violent acts? So that would also bear discussion. And I do want to get to the point because we definitely want to talk about Ferguson, and then we want to talk about why now. Is there some correlation with our present situation, our present growth, our present administration, and what's taking place in Ferguson? And not just Ferguson, we do know that there are other unarmed blacks that have been killed by police. But we're going to take the question from the gentleman here. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I'd like to piggyback on the point you just made, and what Dr. Hill made, and specifically direct the question to Dr. Remember, criminalization. What does the number say? Is there an increase in black males committing crime, or has there been a decrease? Does it seem like there's been an increase?
Actually, it's been decreasing. When you look at crime rates during the 90s, that's when you really see that was actually the peak. After about 91 is when you start seeing a decrease in crime across the board. I mean, you could probably argue some offense types, maybe murders in some city versus others, or maybe theft. But overall, we've seen a decrease in crime. I've always tell my students to be wary about media and all these crime shows. I mean, I would guess that half the television shows that we see are criminal justice oriented, so that it gives you the impression that there's a lot of crime actually going on. So I always tell them, you know, make sure you look at UCR data, which is Uniform Crime Reports. Make sure that you look at reputable websites like Department of Justice to get, you know, get your information and so forth. My background is corrections. I tell people that, you know, when you're dealing with the black offender, it is fear. But at the same time, if you talk to anybody based on race inside the prison environment, the black prisoner is the worst behaved. And that also resorts to a lot of what we call fights. Of course, we will write it up as a use of force, and it may be get it assessed depending on how the individual treats us. But when you look at blacks compared to other racial groups, they get a correction officer as the most biggest flack. Now, as I went through my PhD program, I started to question, why do a black offender, you know, give, you know, me, a person in the criminal justice field, so much flack? And what only question I could probably come up with is, you know, the whole issue of authority, respect for authority. Up until the 60s, you got to think that the criminal justice system, we never, you know, we always had the dogs, you know, biting on us, the whole 9 yards, you know, sick on, you know, black folks. Then right when civil rights passed, to say, okay, now you got to respect the police officer. I don't know, this person was just, you know, just killed my family last week, or, you know, he just pulled me out of the cafe, or he just arrested me. Now you turn around and say, I gotta respect this person. I think it's gonna take time for us to get to a point where we actually respect authority. I just think it's generational now, where you're just gonna have, it's gonna be there. And I always tell people too, you have to also consider what I call hyper-masculinity. And I believe that police officers and correction officers have it too. Meaning that I believe in violence. In a correctional standpoint, like I believe in violence, I have disrespect for women. I'm not saying that us in law enforcement believe that, but that's more towards a person who is a criminal. Because if you got a female officer, you hear the disrespect every day on the block. So I have to come in and take up for that female. It might wind up in a fist fight. It's not going to be what I call, like we have problem with conflict resolution. I'm going to show you with my fist and with my mouth. And I used to participate, I used to fight all the time, but as I got older, I mean, I can't. I mean, I'll be 46 this year. It hurts after a while.
So in your turn, we got a question from the audience, and I'd just like to ask a question about the hyper-masculinity. Do you think, in the fact that you stated that the correctional officers get more opposition from the black incarcerated?
Well, I just think it's culture. I mean, Elijah Anderson, he used the word a nigga moment.
Right, my question is, do you think that term would also apply to white?
No, it applies to anybody in law enforcement, regardless of race. Whenever you're dealing with a criminal, it's like a form of machismo. You're going to do what I say, do, and the offender is doing the same thing. But I believe, and that's just a question that I raise up because nobody's really studying hyper-masculinity. Mexicans, we see it as, in that particular culture, it's called machismo. Like, I know if I approach a person who's Mexican with his family, if I try to talk to him around his family, he's going to be very disrespectful towards me and may become violent. If I move that individual out of sight from his family, then he's more respectful. But, you know, in black men, I mean, I feel it on JSU campus when I walk around. If I don't really know, you know, I might run into a person that's a male, we kind of like looking at each other like, you know, and after we realize, okay, that's a student, that's a professor, hey, how you doing?
Okay, let me take this question.
Good afternoon. My question goes to Professor Renborn. The gentleman over here just asked you about the increase of crime, whether it was increasing or decreasing. You said it was decreasing. Well, how would you explain the increasing of police presence in black communities, the increasing of military weapons being gathered by these municipalities and other law enforcement agencies, and things like this? Also, and this question can go to anybody in the panel. I'm concerned with how law enforcement's understanding of the social situation that black people are trapped in informs their interaction with these communities. Because you have black people who are committing crime. We use this term criminal too lightly. You got a situation where people are trapped into an airtight cage of poverty and they're doing what they have to do to survive. Now, I know that the police, that's not necessarily their job to come out and do social programs and all of this kind of thing.
Actually, it is.
Oh, well, they need to get to it. Because, and I don't want to be long with it, because I know other people want to say something. Since well, you the commander, or you a commander at Hines County?
I'm the commander at Hines County Sheriff Department.
Because, to be honest with you, brother, this metro area crime elimination program, I got some serious problems with it. It's really police occupation. It's really overwhelming of poor black communities with a police presence. And of course you're going to have a machismo. Of course you're going to have what the professor referred to as a hyper-masculinity when somebody is treating you like you're in a police state. So then back to Professor Renborn, you say the respect level with black inmates that are locked away, they don't have a certain level of respect. But I think respect goes both ways. Just because somebody is incarcerated, that doesn't mean that they're human rights, so they shouldn't be given the basic human dignity that any human being should be afforded. Because just because you commit a crime, just because you commit a murder, you just not a murderer. Just because you may rob somebody, you're not necessarily just a robber. You still a human being. You got family, you have emotions and feelings and everything. And this is my last point. This is the reason why that really hits home to me, what you were talking about these inmates. I'm originally from St. Louis, Missouri. I'm a lawyer here in Jackson. But my cousin, he's arrested, he's incarcerated up in Missouri. And just looking at his progress as since he's been in prison, like I grew up with him, he lived with me and everything at one point. A good dude, sound mind and everything. Now, I just watched his progress as he went into this system.
initially he was joking. He thought it was a game. He was all right. But at the point that he's in now, the man is going insane. He has been diagnosed with schizophrenia because of the oppression, the daily oppression that these people are under. So this is things that the criminal justice system from a correction standpoint and with the policing point that I raised, that has to be taken into account when people saying how people are reacting to them. People don't want to be subjected to oppression, to a police state, to occupation. So I'm sorry to be so long.
No, thank you for your comments. But I do tell my students all the time that that's just what it is, occupation. And it's also based on class. If you poor, either be policing, child protective services, they're going to police poor neighborhoods. Whatever the racial demographics is, and you can say it's, poor black folks, we consider poor white folks, or Hispanics. I remember times that I could never patrol the rich neighborhood. I would, when I worked for child protective services, I would park in a place like Madison, intentionally because it had Tennessee Department of Children's Services on it. Police would come up and say, you gotta move that car because the people who live in this community is complaining. But I know in the community that I was policing, I know they commit abuse. They just have money to send their children from treatment across state lines. In reference to offenders, I was indoctrinated into, I tell people to not like the black offender. As I went through my PhD program, you're right about the human rights. I became a better correction officer, and that's how I started finding out why the black inmate pretty much disrespect correctional officers. It's just because of the historical background dealing with oppression. It's really fairness in the system, because every offender will always tell me, I knew when I was engaging in selling drugs that there might be a 50% chance that I might get caught. They never really had a problem with being incarcerated, they just had a problem. They always had a problem with the fairness in the system. Because they'll go to the day room and the white person be like, I was selling crack cocaine, and I got, powder cocaine, I was getting like 5 years. He said, crack, 10 to 1. So crack cocaine at a smaller amount, I got 10 to 15. So that made me start, seeing the line. Of course, you got some real positive brothers in that environment. They pulled me to the side, and I'm talking about inmates that made me a better correction officer. But it was just based on training. And when I'm gonna say training, I'm making reference to the white man's training. Because if you think about corrections, they're out in the county for a reason.
So that's a good response. Let me ask, I do want to make sure we keep this in terms as well. We're talking about Ferguson, and I would ask, when we're talking about Ferguson and criminalization of youth, we're talking about why now wasn't anything that bears discussion about that situation as far as Mike Brown being gunned down, being him not being the only person, having this happened to him not being a black teenager. Is it something that's dealing with Ferguson, or something that him being a hyper masculine youth, him being disobedient, or what would you discuss about that particular incident?
I have a question that my colleagues probably can address a little bit better. Because those of us who teach in criminal justice really talk about the notion of discretion in law enforcement all the time, which is probably the most powerful tool that the officers have. When the decision to arrest, the decision to cite, the decision to sort of engage with the potential suspect really is not at the command level, it's at the street level with the officer that shows up with that person. And the question arising is that how do police officers use that discretion? Do you use something differently when you're dealing with a young black man than you do with a young white man? I ask my students this question. I ask the ladies, if you want someone to stop you at night to possibly give you a ticket, who do you want, a man or a woman? I always ask that question because it's informative about the responses. I ask the black students, do you want a black cop or a white cop on the rest? And there's no right answer to that, because I think the data sort of tells you that police officers can be police officers. But there are some things about who we consider criminal Your comment about black offenders, other words, imagine how that impacts the minds of everybody else. If you live in a white neighborhood, but you come to West Oakland or come to Ferguson every day to police and all the people that you see who are suspects are black, does that inform how you treat other black suspects? When you look at New York's stop and frisk program, they stopped thousands of people over that 10-year period. 80 to 90% of them were innocent. 80 to 90% of them were black and brown, even though they did not. That doesn't reflect the population. So I think the use or abuse of police discretion may be a place we can look to talk about how we respond to people we stop and engage with.
And he's exactly right. Criminal Justice 100, we talk about discretionary powers, not only for police, but for courts and criminal justice, the judge, do I prosecute, district attorney, do I reduce or do I plea bargain? Those discretionary powers, I think some of y'all know that during the Trayvon Martin hearing, just so timely, I was in DC lobbying for a new interracial profiling law. And the study that he brought up was about when New York, when they did the study, the racial profile, 80% was stopped were African American. And then guess what? The 2% that had contraband were African American, but the 90% were what? Whites. White. So it's a police state of mind, sir, that if it's a culture, a police subculture, it's a us versus them mentality. And then your question about Ferguson, that's the perfect place for it to have come to the head. And I said, as I said before, we're so lucky that we have a president that put his hand up and said, stop. I said, hold up. I'm seeing too many military-grade weapons on the streets policing our people. He couldn't say my people because he'd been what? Persecuted. Okay? He said stop. The weapons were allowed to hit the streets under the Bush administration. Those weapons, you can buy an armored vehicle for $50 for a police department. And they sent them out on the streets. And now they're putting these out on the street against our people, and these guys aren't trained. So it does become a what? Occupation, illegal paso comitatus. It is. But what is it? What's helping it is the media a lot of the time, what we call a CSI effect in criminal justice. When you see the show First 48, I applauded Jackson for not letting First 48 go to Jackson. Because if you look at First 48, you think Memphis is what? A killing field. Am I wrong now? Correct me when I'm wrong. Ferguson is Memphis. Because it just so happened to happen in Ferguson. It could happen in Memphis. It could happen in Jackson. But now that the eyes of the world are upon us, what changed the civil rights? The dogs, right? The eyes of the world became upon Mississippi when they saw water cannons being turned on people in the street, when they saw dogs being turned on people in the street, and people in other countries said, wait a minute, America, you preaching all of this equal rights and equality, and here you are persecuting your own African American. But sometimes we can hurt ourselves by going out and overreacting to a negative action. Because we have to realize, and I disagree with Professor Hill on one thing, it does start with education, because we need to know how to respond within the confines of the laws that were written by, and as I said before, individuals who wrote the law to make sure that they are not criminal. So we got to play their game. We got to be better at beating them at their own game. We got to stop the bleeding heart and saying, woe is me, and get smarter and use their playbook against them. And until we do that, we're playing in their hand. They want you to cross that line, sir. They want you to be criminal. I met with some police officers from the Czech Republic over there, and they were talking about the pipeline to the prison. And I'm like, why don't you come to Jackson State? And me and Dr. Morgan sat down and we talked with them, and some of their ideology, they're blaming us in the homes, in the classrooms. They're blaming us. Every explanation we get, well, why can't you all? Why can't you all? Not the system. They were blaming black people.
So let's go to the excuse me, sir, on the second row, I think you had your hand up. I'm sorry.
Lance Jordan, sophomore. I have a question more so. What about the self-image that we were
nature, I feel like that has a lot to do with how cops perceive people. I know I'm from St. Louis, 2 miles away from Ferguson. The first thing I got told when I got down here was, oh, you're not from here, or you're a bad kid, you're from Jennings, Missouri. And my second question is, if we're carrying guns openly, who are we carrying guns for? Are we carrying them for police officers, or are we carrying them for each other? Because I'm walking down the street in my neighborhood, I'm more concerned about another African American coming and attacking more so than a police officer. I think we need to have more community leadership before we just point the finger at, oh, all cops are bad. All cops aren't bad. There's good cops, there's bad cops, there's good soldiers, there's bad soldiers.
Okay, he makes a great point.
John, just respond.
And certainly again, I see several hands that want to respond.
I just want to respond to the self.
And let him respond, please.
I just want to respond to the self-image aspect of this. In other words, when you watch TV and you see people being arrested, oftentimes you see black and brown people. That's a very small percentage of the people in our community who are committing those crimes. They don't show you people going to church. They don't show you fathers taking care of their children. They don't show you any of those things that project positive images of who we are, because that doesn't sell. So what we have to be careful about is making sure that the images that somebody else gives us helps us define who we are. And I agree with you. Not even with police officers, the few bad cops that you see violating the Constitution, that's not most of all. Most of our officers involved in a very dangerous and very important job. How we do our criminal justice system says a lot about who we are. And so I think that I honor the officers who put their lives on the line every day to provide safety, but I also think we need to run out of the department those who violate constitutional rights. We need to lock up those who prey on people in our community as well, regardless of the color. So we have to make sure we're careful about how we define ourselves or how we let other people define who we are.
Thank you, Dan. He had his hand up there for a while. You, sir. The one behind you with the red.
Go ahead,
Go ahead.
Okay, I think what you guys are addressing it pretty well, but we must realize that there are diverse opinions in the black community. And the reason I say that is because you may have some people who are armed with information who are going to make it anyway, because they've had people around them in their lives who were likely to do that. I've given them information at a very early age. So armed with information is very important. Another child may grow up in a home where opportunities weren't given, coming from maybe a mother who's young and has a child and the grandmother's not there to stand to help. And the information is very powerful is what I'm saying. The bottom line of this is that I live in a neighborhood that was predominantly white. And within less than South Jackson, actually, many of you all have heard about that as a combat zone. In my neighborhood, there is no crime. When I say no crime, well, never do we have to call the police for anything other than maybe loud noises. But all around is, crime. And one of the reasons I attribute that to, and to all the white people there, because we have meetings every quarter, every 3 months, was that we kept that going. And sometimes I feel actually like the little light that I'm shedding in the sea of darkness, but I see through that still, that little or no crime, and it's because I talk to people who move into our neighborhood, and not only that, everybody knows my name, and I give them my phone number, and I'm not afraid of giving them my phone number if I'm going to be open to whatever's taking place. And I do call the police if it gets too loud, parties are going on, and that kind of thing. So we've got to remember that to whom much is given, much is required, and that comes from Scripture. Luke 12:48, somewhere there says that, which means that the ones of us who are in here, we've been given the law, and I don't know you individually by name, but by the mere fact that you are here, you have a dignity for information, and not only that, the ones who become in the leadership role to go out into the world, it's not just about you anymore. You turn inwardly. What was the purpose of getting exposed to all that information? You've got something to do. Everyone who's sitting here, if you aspire to it, is not just about where you live. Cast down your bucket where you are, because there are going to be people there that have not been exposed to what you've been exposed to.
and they're gonna need information. And sometimes we aren't gonna have patience enough to do that. But somebody, we're here because people took the responsibility to do that for us. Thank you all.
Thank you. We got a question, Dr. Adams.
Good morning. I want to get back to the title of this panel, which is a criminalization of Black youth. And in the title of this is part of the problem that our kids are called youth, inner city youth. They're never called teenagers. White kids are teenagers. Teenagers get in trouble. Teenagers get a second chance. Black youth get locked up. That's part of the problem. So our kids can't be kids. When our kids are 16, I have a son who's 23 now. When my son was 16, they wanted to call him a man. He ain't a man, he lives in my house. So our young men are not men at 16. They're not men at 18. They're not men at 21 because they do need parental guidance and community support. And part of the problem is how our young men are viewed by society, by us as Black people, and by white people. And the law is not race neutral, brother. I'm sorry, it's not. The law is used against us as a weapon, and I'll give you one instance, case in point. In California, you can sell drugs. If you're a white person, you get charged by the state of California. The state of California is going to give you a more lenient sentence. If you're a Black person and you sell drugs, you're going to get charged with a federal statute, which possibly gives you more time and a harsher sentence. That is not a race-neutral application of the law.
It's the application you're talking about, not the law itself.
Well, if it's being applied that way, it's still a law. So that's how I see personally. People are tired. I'm tired. I'm a law-abiding citizen. I don't break the law. When I go out on Friday nights to drive through my neighborhood, I see police zipping up and down the street on Ellis and pulling people over. You know what I do? I go home. So I don't go out and spend my money in the community. I don't go visit friends and people in the community. I go home. Because home is where I can be safe. And I don't have the police pulling me over and asking me what I'm doing out on the street. Why is it your business what I'm doing on the street? I'm not breaking the law. I'm being law-abiding. So we are occupied, and as a middle-class Black woman who's raising young Black men, I'm tired of the police shootings. Just yesterday, a young man was coming home to his house, Black man being fostered by white parents, walked into his door and got tased by the police in his own house because of the stereotypes of who Black youth are. Youth, not teenagers. We need to get back to where kids can be teenagers. Teenagers make mistakes. Teenagers need second chances. Teenagers need support from the community, not youth, not men, not girls, but teenagers. White kids blow up a mailbox if a prank's gone wrong. Black kids do it, destruction of property, 5 to 10, locking you up. That's the real. That's the real.
I want to address that other people, because you all two are saying the same thing. You two are saying the same thing about police state and occupation, and I'm not making any excuses about that. And I tell my students all the time, before I became an academic, I saw perp, I arrested perp. And that's what we call them. I saw a perpetrator, I arrested perpetrator. But once I got academically educated, my whole mentality about law enforcement changed. I was able to clean up a whole neighborhood and get, not make one arrest, because I found other ways than making the rest of our young Black men. But what we have to, it does go back to application of the law by the person who's applying that law. And it goes back to what I said from the very beginning. Ferguson, all of this goes back to what I said at the very beginning. Those who write the laws to ensure that they themselves are not prosecuted. How do they get in office? We stay home. We vote more for Miss JSU than we do for the city council. We won't go, Jackson, the school is a precinct within itself. And during the Solid Norwood's election, someone called me at 3 o'clock and said, Levine, what is going on that campus? I said, what's wrong? Only 100 people that voted. This is for the House of Representatives for this district. I said, go get the Qs in my frats and put them out there and put them to work. At some point, we have to take accountability for ourselves at a lower level. How? Vote. If that district attorney wants to plea bargain all the time, vote him out of office. If you don't like to pull up your pants legislation, then get some city council members in there who's going to vote the consciousness of his constituents. That's the power we have. That's what this whole building is about.
Okay, let me let you in the back here.
Good.
Before I say, kind of go back to something you were saying earlier. I mean, you gave the history of your own personal history of your racial struggle. And I think that's what this criminal injustice system is all about, is our racial struggle. But I think we need to look at it in terms of where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. And with that thought in mind, I wanted to find out why it is that you all think that we should not respond to injustice. I think it was you who said that we need to go and do some empirical research and not respond emotionally, when in fact our nature calls us to respond emotionally.
Don't make it right every time, though.
It don't make it right, just like the crimes that are committed against us aren't right.
Exactly.
But again, what I'm suggesting is that we have these young people here who are taking criminal justice classes, and the young brother said we need more leadership. Why come we can't get that leadership from our instructors who are instructing these young people so that they will do the empirical data? Because the majority of our population is not going to Jackson State, Tougaloo, Alcorn, or whatever. So their only response is that emotional response. If we don't get the leadership from these young people and understanding why Ferguson, from a historical perspective, recognizing where we are contemporarily, and then looking at it futuristically, then we're going to keep going through these problems. And then when we look at the idea that we have officers who think that officers are always right, then we have a problem. We have problems that we have to deal with there. So I think, what will it take in order for us to get instructors to start instructing these students to get involved in the struggle while they are actually, getting this learning, these educations? Because again, the most important part of it is what King did. King took the church to the community, as opposed to waiting for the community to come to the church.
Well, on that case, I am one of those instructors. I'm sure these guys are too. But my most egregious experience with the law enforcement came from a black officer while I was a student at Jackson State. I tell my students, don't judge me because I wore a badge. As a student at Jackson State, I was handcuffed, beaten with a nightstick, and had my jaw broke clean in two with a PR-24, and had to have oral surgery, and had my mouth wired shut for 8 weeks. So know my struggle before you judge my call. So I told these guys I became a police officer so I can have a voice. As a young man being abused by the criminal justice system, I said I'd be a lawyer. And I said, wait a minute, they put lawyers in jail. So if I be a police officer, I can have a voice. So let's not be so definitive and criticize all instructors. That was an instructor that stood up back there with all that passion. Some of us instructors are telling the truth. But the problem we have, if you heard what I said before, why are we marching on downtown saying put criminal justice courses in the middle school so we can stop miseducating our young black men? If you're willing to put on your marching shoes and walk with me, set the date and we'll walk.
Let me get your question.
Thank you. So Max Weber said that the state tries to maintain the legitimate use of violence, right? So with respect to that, I mean, the state behaving violently is not a new advent. It's actually performing one of its key functions. But what I want to know, right, so everybody's kind of a little bit, oh, it's violent. Well, that's one of the things that the state does. You can't put somebody in prison because they did something against you or agreed you in some kind of way, but the state can put you in prison and let you out 4 years later. That's perfectly normal. You do that, it's kidnapping and imprisonment, you go to jail. So what I want to know is, past the violence, beyond that, how do I keep from becoming a Michael Brown? Because I do have a fear of police. Anybody?
I mean, I tell my students all the time, whenever you are in interaction with the police department, you have to behave in a respectful manner. Don't have an attitude, do everything that they ask you to do, regardless if you feeling that they're treating you wrong. Because at the end of the day, they got a pistol, and they can use it. If there's an incident where a person who still might get shot, it would look totally different if that individual was just sitting on the curb with his hands behind his back and got shot versus one where the officer could sit and say, well, he might have been approaching me fine. We have to take, nobody never really wanted to, I believe we gotta take some of the blame of it too. Now, I'm gonna tell you this, officers and offenders, law enforcement and criminals have the same attitude when we interact. It's that same attitude when you talk about black on black violence. The bucking up, yeah, what you looking at, why you step on my shoes. When I'm making reference to the statement I'm about to say, I'm just telling you how it is. I don't agree with it, but there's a fear of a black man, there's oppression of a black man. We believe that they're the most dangerous, the most violent. All that is portrayed by the system. So if you're an officer and you're encountering a black person, that's running through your mind. I've been able to overcome that because of education. But at the same time, you know, I participated on both sides, but as I got more education, I started addressing the offender a lot differently. Some individuals can't do that. I tell people that, you know, as far as being in the community, I went in the community when we had the problem with the crack versus powder cocaine. I went to some of the guys who sell crack and say, hey, y'all might, I would show them the policy and say, y'all might, I'm not gonna stop them from committing crime, but at least I can stop for them getting harsher sentences. To me, that's social justice. It's just pure hatred for the black male. But we gotta take some of the blunt through training. You gotta train police officers, you gotta train people who based in encounters. Like when we encounter white folk, but there, you gotta remember too that black folks participate in brutality also. Your police officers.
Can I just respond to that question?
This gentleman has his hand up.
Dr. I just want to comment on your discussion with Michael Brown and Ferguson, Missouri, and its implications, and its I guess it's comparisons and contrasts to Zimmerman and Trayvon Martin as mentioned. I'd like to know, how do you see the differences and the comparisons or similarities, if you will, and how would you accept or identify African Americans who want to live in white communities such as Redmond or such as Bellevue, Washington, such as East Memphis, such as Sugar Land, Texas? How can they secure safety within their homes looking at situations such as this?
Yeah, I think it's related to the question that was asked earlier. I don't think anybody can protect you from being another Michael Brown. That's not within the power of anybody to do that. So I think that one of the issues becomes is that when my colleague said that you should do what police say, most circumstantial safety may require you to sort of just be chill and be cool, but that's what civil disobedience is about. If you think there's some injustice around that, there are time, places, and manner when you should exercise your right under the Constitution to have civil disobedience. But nobody can protect you. I'm raising a young black man and a young black woman. I have a son who's 23, in other words, and you're right, in other words, he's a big guy. He's like 6'1", 270. He's been that way for a long time. So at 13, he wasn't a man. And there's data out there. We did a survey at LAPD that shows that officers overestimate the age of young black kids. Yeah. They think that they're older. But living, you should be able to live wherever you want to live, in other words. But that's a personal choice. But nobody can guarantee your safety, in other words, in terms of where you choose to live. They can't guarantee your safety no matter where you are, what neighborhood you're in. I think that's you becoming well aware of how you move around in your community. But for my kids, I've lived in multicultural places all over the world. I live in the Bay Area now, which is probably one of the most diverse places around. But for me, otherwise, I teach my children to be bicultural. I teach my children to be able to sort of move wherever they are in ways and communicate in ways and to recognize how to be safe. That's unfortunate, but that's just the way it is right now. In other words, we're not that far removed from the time and place, in other words, where the laws did specifically say that if you're black, this is going to happen to you. We moved past that from it actually saying that, but the application of the law still impacts us in a way. So nobody can really save you from that. You have to save yourself.
Okay, so we're going to take, it's a very good discussion, but we have to keep in mind the time frame. We're going to take the last question, the gentleman here.
My name is Curtis Scott. I'm a senior criminal just to make sure just to say, I really don't have a question, I kind of have a statement. I know from just kind of talking to a lot of my friends about laws, when I'm talking to them about like Michael Brown case, they're not looking at it from a standpoint of what may have happened. They're looking at it from the fact that a white officer killed a black guy. They don't want to look at the fact that maybe Mike Brown did something wrong. And so what I want people to realize is, yeah, you do have laws that are made to punish some people and protect some people. But I think it's important for us to know those laws. Because in Missouri, if the officer have a right to shoot you if he feels that his life is in danger. And what I think we have to understand is it's not trying to say, oh, I hate the police, I hate the police. It's not the police, it's the lawmakers. Because what you have to do is, if something happens in Missouri, Jackson, or whatever, you have to say, I'm not going to beat the police down or have this vendetta against the police. Because the police are doing what the law allows them to do. We have to say, I'm finna go talk to the mayor, I'm finna go talk to the representative, I'm finna go talk to the Senate to say, hey, why does this law allow a police officer to overshoot somebody 4 or 5 times? And I also think, I was talking to a girl yesterday, she did not want to hear what I was saying about what the law allowed this guy to do to Mike Brown. All she saw was white guy killed a black guy, and I think it's important for us as black people to say, hey, that's not always the case. We are wrong, and I don't think we have enough people saying that we are wrong. Because you have people like Reverend Al Sharpton, who only shows up when something happens like this. Why he not in Chicago going off about the 200 black people that get killed each year in Chicago? But the moment you have one black person killed by a white person, he want to run down and say, oh, this is a civil rights issue. And what they do to some people is say, white people are evil, the police are evil. Rather than saying, hey, we have to look at ourselves to see what kind of problems we're causing ourselves, because we don't know the law. I think some people know the law, but a lot of people don't know the law. A lot of people don't know 5 miles over the speed limit is speeding.
So you get shot for that?
You don't get shot for that, but if a police officer pull you over for going 5 miles over the speed limit, who's in the wrong?
But we freaking end up shot for that.
But you don't. But see, we don't know. If a police officer
shot, dead.
Okay, but let me show you how. Let me show you how. If a police officer pull you over for going 5 miles over the speed limit, you're thinking, oh, I didn't do nothing wrong. Because you're thinking 5 miles over the speed limit is not an issue. Oh, I didn't break the law, I'm going 5 miles over the speed limit. That's not a crime to me. But that is against the law. So if the police pull you over, the first thing that come out your mouth is, man, what you pull me over for? Well, you want 5 miles over the speed limit. If you know the law, you won't break these laws and commit these crimes, you will be able to avoid the police. We have, but it's not true. You have to know how to
The law is breaking up.
Hold on a minute. Let me just go ahead and address it. I want to kind of just say very quickly, you know, young man. I do want to ask a question since you put the question out there. What do you think Mike Brown did?
Well, we all know about the whole, I'm not even going to bring up the fact that he went into the store, because that don't even have nothing to do with it coming out the police officer mouth. But what they said Mike Brown did was jaywalk. Now, that's something so small. Don't nobody deserve to get shot for certain. Don't nobody deserve to get killed, period, in my view. But in St. Louis and Missouri, jaywalking is illegal. So if you know jaywalking is illegal, you won't do it. So it's our responsibility for us to know this, to tell people, hey, you might not think jaywalking is illegal, but guess what? It is. So if a police officer stops you for jaywalking, you have to say, I'm sorry, sir, yes, I was jaywalking, I broke the law. Instead of just saying, man, what you put me over for jaywalking? We have to know the laws, and we have to be able to say.
I thought you said the officer felt like his life was in danger.
I didn't say anything about the law.
You said danger. So the question is, how does you define danger?
I didn't say anything about the officer.
How does the officer define when his life is in danger? What is danger?
I didn't say anything about the police officer saying that his life is in danger. I didn't say anything.
But what is danger?
What is danger?
Okay, everybody.
I know.
Thank you.